From the beginning, something in you moved at a different rhythm. You could feel in ordinary places, in rooms where everyone else seemed to settle in without effort, in conversations that passed easily between people while you stood just outside the current, listening to words and sensing something deeper beneath them. It was never only social discomfort. It was more ancient than that. It was the strange feeling that the world being presented to you was incomplete, as if the surface of life was asking for your attention, while another layer, quieter and more real, kept calling from underneath. This is why fitting in never came naturally. You were trying to enter patterns that were not made for the shape of your mind, your spirit, your way of seeing. Other people could accept the rules and move on. They could live inside the visible structure of things and feel at home there. But some part of you kept searching for what was hidden behind the structure. You noticed contradictions. You felt the emotional weather in a room before anyone spoke. You sensed falseness long before you had language for it. And because of that, the world often treated your sensitivity as a problem instead of perception. There's a reason ancient minds understood this differently. In the old mystical traditions, the one who did not blend easily into the world was not always seen as broken. Sometimes they were seen as marked, not marked for comfort, and not marked for superiority, but marked for a certain burden of awareness. Thoth, keeper of wisdom, measurer of hidden order, was linked with the power to read what others missed. He belonged to the threshold between the visible and the invisible, between language and silence, between human confusion and cosmic law. To walk near that kind of wisdom is to become difficult to place in ordinary life. You begin to feel that what most people call reality is only a thin layer stretched over something vast. That feeling can wound you when you are young. You may think something is wrong with you because you cannot relax into what seems to satisfy everyone else. You may force yourself to perform normality, to smile at what does not move you, to chase approval from people whose attention leaves you feeling even more empty. Over time, that performance becomes exhausting. The soul grows tired when it is asked to pretend for too long. And that tiredness is not weakness. It is a sign that something true inside you is refusing to die. The pain of not belonging has a hidden function. It protects you from merging completely with a world that might have put your deeper sight to sleep. If you had fit in perfectly, you might never have questioned anything. You might never have gone looking for the pattern behind the pattern. You might never have discovered that your discomfort was not random, but instructive. It was teaching you to stop expecting home from places that were only ever meant to test your discernment. So the wound came first. The loneliness came first. The sense of being misplaced came first. But hidden inside that early ache was the beginning of recognition. You were not outside the world because you failed to enter it. You were outside it because some deeper part of you could already feel its limits. And once a soul begins to sense the limits of ordinary life, it can never again be fully convinced by appearances. That is where the path quietly begins, not in certainty, but in the first honest awareness that you were never meant to belong to the illusion in the same way others do. Once you begin to understand that your distance from the world was not an accident, another realization starts to unfold. The very qualities that made you hard to understand were also the clues. They were not random quirks. They were signs. Small at first, almost easy to dismiss, but consistent over the years. You felt things before they happened. You read the weight behind people's words. You could sense when someone was wearing a mask, even if everyone else seemed convinced by the performance. And because you noticed what others ignored, life often felt heavier for you. You were carrying more than the visible moment. This is the hidden mark of difference. It is not something stamped on the body. It appears in perception, in instinct, in the strange ability to feel out of place inside systems that depend on surface agreement. People with this kind of inner wiring often spend years trying to explain themselves in ordinary language, only to find that the explanation never fully lands. What they mean is too subtle. What they feel is too layered. They know something is there, but the world keeps asking them to make it simpler than it really is. Ancient wisdom did not always treat this as confusion. In older symbolic traditions, difference in perception carried spiritual meaning. Thoth, the divine scribe, was not only associated with knowledge, but with the ability to translate between realms. He stood where hidden truth became form, where the invisible became language. That kind of symbolism matters here because the chosen soul is often forced into the same position. You become a translator without asking to be one. You try to put strange inner knowing into human speech. You try to explain why certain places drain you, why some people disturb you even when they seem pleasant, why truth has a texture you can feel before it has a shape you can describe. For a long time, this difference may have felt more like a curse than a gift. It may have made relationships harder. It may have made simple environments feel crowded, loud, or false. It may have made you doubt your own mind, especially when others told you that you were reading too much into things. That phrase follows many awakened people in the early stages of their life. You're too intense, too sensitive, too serious, too observant. But what they call too much is often just unfiltered perception. You are seeing without the protective blur that helps other people move more comfortably through illusion. This does not mean every feeling is sacred or every instinct is perfect. It means your nature has always leaned toward depth, and depth can be inconvenient in a world that rewards speed, distraction, and easy labels. Still, the mark remains. It shows itself in the way you cannot unknow what you have sensed. It shows itself in the way certain truths arrive whole, before logic catches up. It shows itself in the way you keep returning to questions that others outgrow too quickly. Who am I beneath all this? Why does this reality feel staged? Why do some moments seem to open, as if another intelligence is briefly looking back at me? The mark of difference is not there to make you feel special. It is there to make you responsible. Once you know you perceive differently, you can no longer live as if your sight means nothing. You begin to understand that your alienation was carrying information. Your strangeness was pointing somewhere. The world called it misfit energy because it had no better name for it. But beneath the discomfort, beneath the long seasons of doubt, something quieter has always been true. You are not unfinished. You are being tuned to hear what this world is usually too loud to reveal. That tuning rarely happens in comfort. It happens in separation. It happens in the long stretches when life seems to pull you away from the noise, away from the groups, away from the easy belonging you once thought you needed. At first, isolation feels like loss. It can feel like abandonment, like being left outside the warmth of ordinary human life. You watch others move in circles of friendship, certainty, routine, and shared distraction, while you are pushed inward, deeper into your own silence. It is one of the hardest stages to understand while you're living through it, because nothing about it feels noble in the moment. It feels empty. It feels unfair. It feels like being forgotten. But this is often where your real sight begins to sharpen. When there are fewer voices around you, you start hearing the difference between what is yours and what was placed inside you by the world. In company, people absorb each other's fears, ambitions, habits, and opinions without noticing. They begin to mistake borrowed thoughts for identity. Isolation interrupts that process. It removes the constant pressure to perform. It strips away the social mirrors that tell you who to be. And in that stripped-down space, something unsettling but necessary begins to happen. You meet yourself without decoration. This is why so many spiritual traditions speak of deserts, caves, mountains, night journeys, and silent chambers. These are not only physical places, they are inner states. They describe the period when the soul can no longer grow through noise and must pass through emptiness instead. Thoth, as a keeper of sacred measure, belongs to this kind of inner discipline. His wisdom is not loud. It does not chase attention. It reveals itself in stillness, in careful observation, in the patient reading of what others rush past. To come near that kind of knowing, a person often has to be separated from the crowd long enough to see what the crowd was hiding. During this trial, many chosen souls begin to think they're losing something when they are actually losing what was never essential. Old identities fall away. Certain relationships fade because they were built on versions of you that can no longer survive. Familiar goals lose their shine. Places that once seemed promising begin to feel hollow. This can be painful because the human part of you still wants reassurance. It wants a sign that all this emptiness is leading somewhere. Yet the deeper process does not usually offer immediate comfort. It asks for endurance first. It asks whether you can remain present long enough to let a truer self emerge. And slowly, the isolation changes texture. What first felt like punishment begins to feel like space. The silence that once frightened you starts becoming intelligent. You notice how much clearer your perception is when it is not crowded by other people's energy. You begin to trust the quiet signals inside yourself. You see patterns in your life that were invisible before. You understand why certain wounds had to surface, why certain illusions had to break, why your path could not unfold in the same rhythm as everyone else's. Isolation, then, was never just absence. It was refinement. It was the furnace where dependency burned away and perception became cleaner. It was the place where your inner authority began to grow roots. You were being taught to stand without constant confirmation, to listen without applause, to know without needing immediate agreement. And once that kind of strength begins to form, the soul becomes harder to manipulate. It stops begging the world to explain its own destiny. It begins to sense that the loneliness was not the end of the path. It was the sacred corridor that led you toward your own unmistakable center. Once that inner center begins to form, the world starts feeling different again. Not because it has changed, but because you're seeing more clearly what it depends on. Most people move through life inside agreed meanings. They trust the labels they were given. They accept the pace, the goals, the rules of value, the approved ways of speaking, succeeding, belonging. There is a deep comfort in that arrangement. It gives shape to the day. It keeps anxiety contained. It offers a script. But the moment someone begins to see through the script, tension appears. The system may not say it openly, yet it feels the disturbance. A person who recognizes illusion becomes difficult to settle back into it. This is where many chosen souls encounter a strange pattern. The more authentic they become, the more resistance they seem to meet. Not always dramatic resistance. Sometimes it arrives as subtle dismissal. Sometimes as misunderstanding. Sometimes as the quiet withdrawal of people who are comfortable only with the smaller, edited version of you. There are environments that welcome your gifts only as long as those gifts remain useful, decorative, or controllable. But when your clarity starts exposing what is false, something shifts. The room cools. Conversations change. You begin to notice how often people prefer familiar distortion over liberating truth. That preference is ancient. Human beings do not only fear darkness. Very often, they fear recognition. To be recognized in the deepest sense is not simply to be seen by others. It is to stand face to face with what is real without the protective veil. That can be unsettling. It can disrupt identities, relationships, ambitions, even entire belief systems. Thoth's wisdom carries this edge. He is not merely a symbol of secret knowledge. He represents the law beneath appearance, the ordering intelligence that remains whether the human mind approves of it or not. To encounter that kind of truth is to feel how much of ordinary life is built on fragile agreements. This is why your presence may have disturbed people even when you said very little. Some souls carry a revealing energy. They do not have to preach. They do not have to argue. Their mere sincerity becomes uncomfortable in places built on performance. Their stillness makes noise look frantic. Their questions make shallow certainty look weak. Their refusal to pretend reminds others of how much pretending they are doing. And because most people are not ready to examine the structures that hold their identity together, they may react by minimizing the one who reflects too much back to them. It is important to understand this without bitterness. The world is not one single enemy, and people are not villains for being afraid. Many are simply protecting the only reality they know how to live inside. Their resistance is often the reflex of an unready mind. But for you, recognizing this changes everything. It frees you from the exhausting habit of taking every rejection personally. Some doors close not because you lacked worth, but because your presence was asking for more truth than that space could bear. Some people misread you because accuracy would have forced them to change. Some systems pushed back because conscious individuals are harder to guide by fear, vanity, or repetition. And this is the deeper turning point. Once you see that the world often resists recognition, you stop asking it for permission to become who you are. You begin to understand that your path was never meant to be validated by mass agreement. It was meant to be clarified through contrast. The resistance itself revealed the nature of your gift. You were not only meant to survive illusion, you were meant to detect it, endure it, and eventually move beyond its reach with your sight intact. After enough years of trying to belong to a world that never fully answered you, a quieter understanding begins to rise. It does not arrive all at once. It comes in moments. A sudden calm after a long period of confusion. A deep sense of recognition in solitude. A strange certainty that your life was never random, even when it looked scattered from the outside. You begin to see that what once felt like exile was also guidance. Every place where you could not stay asleep, every relationship that could not hold your deeper self, every disappointment that forced you inward was turning you toward a different threshold. This is the door beyond the reality you were first given. It does not mean leaving the physical world behind. It means seeing through its spell. It means understanding that the world most people defend so fiercely is only one layer of existence. A layer built from habits of perception, inherited fears, social rituals, and repeated stories about what matters. Once you begin to perceive that layer as a construction rather than an absolute truth, your entire inner life changes. You stop measuring yourself only by visible success. You stop treating delay as failure. You stop assuming that being misunderstood is evidence against your path. Instead, you begin asking a different question. What is life trying to show me through this experience that could never be taught through comfort alone? That question opens a deeper intelligence. In the symbolic field of Thoth, wisdom is never just information. It is alignment. It is the moment when the soul begins to live in harmony with a truth larger than personal survival. This is why your life may have felt guided by invisible pressures. You are not merely trying to build a life. You are being shaped into someone who could read beneath life. The pain of not fitting in, the mark of difference, the trial of isolation, the resistance of the world, none of it was separate. It was one long initiation, drawing you away from borrowed identities and toward a clearer relationship with what is eternal in you. When this understanding settles in, even briefly, something softens. You no longer need to force yourself into spaces that shrink your spirit. You no longer chase every invitation. You no longer panic when the crowd does not understand you. There is dignity now in your pace. There is patience in your silence. There is a new kind of confidence that does not depend on noise. You start trusting the strange inner compass that once made life harder, because you can finally see that it was protecting you from false paths all along. And with that trust comes purpose, not the loud, performative kind of purpose that demands constant announcement, but a sacred direction that reshapes the way you move through everything. You become more careful with your energy, more honest with your speech, more sensitive to what drains the soul and what nourishes it. You notice that some encounters carry meaning far beyond the surface. You feel that your presence itself can become a form of service when it is rooted in clarity. You begin to understand that not fitting into this world was never the final truth about you. The final truth is that you were learning how to stand in it without belonging to its illusion. That is why the path always felt larger than explanation. At some level, you already knew that your life was not asking for simple adaptation. It was asking for awakening. It was asking you to remember that difference can become vision, that loneliness can become strength, that rejection can become refinement, and that the soul which cannot fully merge with illusion may be the very soul meant to point beyond it. So if you've spent years feeling misplaced, let this be the turning of the key. You are not forgotten. You were not made wrong. You were being prepared to see with a wider sight, to live with a deeper center, and to walk through this world with a quiet knowledge that your home was never meant to be built from appearances alone. The deeper peace begins when you stop calling your path a mistake. For so long, you may have interpreted your difference through the language of loss. You may have believed that if life had gone better, if people had understood you more easily, if the world had welcomed you more naturally, then you would have become lighter, happier, more whole. But some souls are not shaped through easy acceptance. Some are formed through contrast, through distance, through the long work of learning to recognize truth without the permission of the crowd. That is why your life has carried this unusual atmosphere around it. Even in ordinary moments, there has often been another current moving beneath the surface, a sense that something unseen was trying to teach you through every fracture. Not to harden you into coldness, but to deepen you into clarity. Not to isolate you forever, but to show you the difference between loneliness and inner ground. Not to make you superior, but to make you sincere. And sincerity is rarer than most people know. To become sincere in soul is to stop arranging yourself around illusion. It is to stop trading your inner knowing for temporary comfort. It is to stop pretending that the noise of the world is enough to satisfy what is ancient in you. That change can look quiet from the outside, yet it is immense. It is the rebirth of spiritual dignity. So now, when you look back, perhaps you can see the pattern with gentler eyes. The places where you did not fit were not proof of failure. The seasons of solitude were not empty. The resistance you met was not always meant to stop you. Much of it was meant to reveal you to yourself. And the wisdom that watched over your becoming did not abandon you in the dark. It worked through the dark, patiently, until your own vision was strong enough to meet it. This is where the journey opens into grace. You do not need every answer at once. You only need the courage to trust what your soul has been trying to show you from the beginning. You were never here merely to belong. You were here to awaken, to remember, and to walk with the kind of quiet truth that makes even this world, for a moment, feel transparent to the eternal.